this is first ever gathering of current Fulbright awardees and former Fulbright awardees under the roof of this illustrious institution of Fulbright, the most progressive university in Moldova, the most international-minded university in Moldova. And so we are graced by the presence of several important people in Sweden. We have, like I said, awardees of Fulbright. We also have social development attaché, Kate Bartlett. And Ariane Cullen is also here with us from the So we also, of course, have the top brass of ULIM as a vice rector of the International Affairs, Karina Kozhakaru, and we, of course, have our Valentina Chumachenko with us, and we're expecting from minute to minute our rector, Galvin. So just 2 words about it, and also my role. I will facilitate this event the best I can. I share the pleasure of being a Fulbrighter and also having the honor of working at ULIM for the past 2.5 years on creating the Master of Social Work program. The purpose of this event is in the form of the conversation, a colloquium, to explore the notion of the boundary, the frontier. The boundary being both as a subject, which is very worthy of a discussion and an exploration, and also the subject of what it means to go beyond the boundary to make discoveries about yourself and your home. This is how we frame the discussion. So I will turn from one speaker to another, and we are going to probably allot somewhere about 5 minutes, from 3 to 5 minutes to each of the speakers. And we'll have 1 or 2 questions after the person who shared his views, his take on the boundary and on the experience of transcending the boundary to find himself or herself. Right? So far so good? Am I doing okay? So without further ado on the subject that we identified, the first word was Adam Levy, because 2 reasons to do it. First, he's in a rush. And the second reason is that actually the subject of the boundary was something that he broached when we met in Washington, and this is the subject of his research. So,
thank you. Hi, everyone. Maybe I'm going to stand up so you can hear me. Maybe you all see me, or do I need to move around? I'm okay? I'll just talk a few minutes. I'm a political geographer. I'm coming to you from the University of Colorado at Boulder. I'm very happy to be here. I started working in Moldova in 2002. Had the pleasure of coming to ULIM. You do a lot of work with EUBOM, the EU's border assistance mission, yes? And so this is a great place to be here to discuss boundaries. And as a political geographer, I'm interested in how borders between people rise and fall. And when as he likes to say, the eponymously named Professor Moldovan and I met in DC at orientation, we did in fact have a fabulous set of discussions about what constitutes a boundary and what is always constituting a boundary. It's a boundary different from a frontier. So I have a few thoughts here because my project, my Fulbright project, is a joint teaching and research project called the Border Awareness Model. It's the other kind of bomb. It's not the EU bomb, it's the US bomb, right? Okay. And this is based on some projects we do at the University of Colorado, taking students to border checkpoints, migration detention centers in El Paso, on the US-Mexico border. Well, thinking about films, thinking about how to understand geography, geography, right? Earth writing, okay? The way to understand how the world is written and how the world is understood and spoken, the nation, the household, the country, the region. And why is it that I keep coming back to Republika Moldova whenever I say to people, this is one of the most interesting places on earth, and people laugh. And I keep coming back. I know a lot of people are leaving, but I keep coming back. And why? Well, one of the arguments that I would like to put for you today in thinking about how the geo is graphed and how the earth is written, space is written, is to think about this particular place, and this particular space, right, as an area, and a zone. And I just want to take this back, if the historian will not correct me, to the time of Herodotus, right, to Herodot, right, to 450 BC. And why? Well, he was the father of not geography, right, but of history, but it's okay, we learned some things from him. And his methodology, his method was autopsy, or autoscop, to see for oneself. So if I'm interested in how borders between people rise and fall, I'm interested in taking down those barriers, not by looking at the contents and characterizing and calculating the contents of these different kinds of barriers, but by looking at zones of intermixing and that blurring of the boundary. And that really is where a lot of the politics can be found. So that's one of the questions we're really interested in. But in the sense of a longer historical geographical sense, why here? Well, if we think back to the time of Herodotus, 450 BC, he's writing about the Berber Babel, right? The bearded ones onomatopoeia, the Scythians, right? The ancient civilizations who were here. He didn't understand their language. We now have the word barbat, and barba, yes, from the barbarian, the unintelligible words of the barbarian, okay? So we can understand, in fact, maybe the birth of the Western, the earth is round, the Western geographic and geopolitical imagination comes from this region. We can think of barbarians versus civilization. Okay? I can talk about this later, but I only have like 3 minutes left, so I'm going to move forward. So in thinking about this geographic imagination, how places are always constantly east, west, inside, outside, national citizenship questions, of us, of them, well, we can think about how is it that in Moldova we understand space. You know, we see cartoons or caricatures of not Republika Moldova, not Rezervația Moldova, right, sometimes, okay? Or we can think about another way of looking at it is when we pass the frontier as a zone of contact. In Romania, right, we think of a geography, we think of a point de trecere, right, an organized point of crossing, point of passing. But what kind of zone do we have along the Prut? When we think about it now, do we have a clear boundary, a point, or do we have a different kind of legacy? Do we have a zona de frontiera, right? And again, thinking back to the idea of the zone of indistinction of a specialized region with a historical and geographic legacy, we can think back to not only zona, understood in the same way of the Romanian speakers, right, a point versus zone, movable area between spaces, right, over space and time, subject to a different set of rules, maybe a different set of permissions, but on its inverse, what we can also think of is for those of you Russian speakers. Do you also understand a different meaning of the word zona? Perhaps as I understand as a synonym for prison? So thinking about how these spaces come to be in zones of transgression, and so in preparing for this film and thinking a lot about how borders between people rise and fall in this space, I will think not of Jim Carrey and the uplifting elements of American comedy, but of Soviet high art and the ideas of the famous Russian filmmaker Tarkovsky. And Tarkovsky had a very famous film that was very long, and I will now summarize the main point for you. Right? So if you haven't seen Stalker, I'm trying to think how to say it. In Caloaza in Romanian, maybe? I'm not sure. Stalker in English. Okay, it's not a lot of words, so it's okay. But the whole point of zona is about entering into a zone of transgression where conventional borders and boundaries are blurred. And that is where the space of enlightenment and real political challenge can occur. So I would implore you, I would encourage you, before I go off to teach about problems and sovereignties and get to miss the uplifting Jim Carrey film about how really to think about the world given your experience in this place. And the different ways that you have experienced East and West and understood barriers between people rising and falling in a way that can help you to understand those barriers, but also to help bring them down. Right? Because it's not just how they're made, it's how they're remade. And so that's really why I'm here, and I'm excited to be here. I know you've got a lot of other great people here who are equally excited to share. And if you have any questions, that's what I've got for you today.
Good time for one question. One question. Frozen zone.
We covered like 450 BC to today in 6 minutes.
How did you end up in Moldova in the first place? I know it was a stroke of luck.
That was my answer. I had the pleasure of studying under an Irish professor who works at the University of Colorado, who later became my PhD advisor and has worked here for 20 plus years. So I studied Moldova as an object, the boundary object, before I wanted to come and conduct autopsy to see for myself so that I could experience how these boundaries between people rise and fall. And it's been the most delicious experience ever.
Can we also listen to the former recipients of Fulbright? Please, like 2 minutes each, please.
So I am Ludmila. I also had a big pleasure to be a Fulbright scholar 3 years ago, already 3 years ago, in 2010 and 11 in George Washington University, Institute for Eastern European and Eurasian Studies, because of my, say, region I came from, first of all, but also about connected with the research I do, or my research scientific interest. So speaking or talking about boundaries, I'll begin with this region to continue your ideas. Yes, there are big differences between boundaries and frontiers, and here we know maybe better than many others being somewhere abroad, because, say, first of all, during the Soviet time, we know frontiers en route, but many people identify themselves as being Romanian, as we do nowadays, and it was hard for many of them actually to accept the idea that we have a frontier. But from the other point of view, frontiers make some changes, or big changes in mentality, of course, because boundaries actually, we think that boundaries are created artificially somehow, or frontiers artificially, but it's easy to remove them. From the other hand, point of view, boundaries, it's harder to move, I guess, because maybe it's connected with mentality, and sometimes many people here, again, if I'm trying to look at the people, many of them hardly will actually have an idea that they are, say, Romanian, or there shouldn't be a border, frontier there. From another point of view, legacy in the past actually led us to maybe somehow to seem or act artificially, some kind of. As about my experience abroad, I would say that I was more a close person, I would say, working here, but having the experience abroad, being in America, I could actually come back, maybe not totally, but with many changes in my mind. First of all, I would say the attitude to students changed, the attitude to how to teach changed. In terms of methods, in terms of content, because I would say before going to America, I was very strong. You should know a lot of information, history, geopolitics, politics, everything I thought about. And there I understood that skills are more important. Because with knowledge is information, you can all time to read something, to forget, to read something else, but how to deal with the information, how to work with, how to choose something is more, how to develop the skills is more important. So I would say that this experience actually removed all boundaries outside me, so it was a very good my experience and my approach to research, to different, how to research, how to do things.
Thank you. Any questions on the Fulbright experience in the United States, across the boundary the other way?
I have a question. So you went to my grad school. I went to graduate school in George Washington. How did you like your experience on the other side?
What time on the what period?
I just graduated in 2013.
13.
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
you was a student. Yes.
Did you enjoy your time?
Of course, it was a great period, the best period of my life. I would like to go back. I am actually thinking about this idea to find another opportunity to go. So it was a great experience, maybe because of people I work with in the institute, George Washington University, but also because of the opportunity Washington actually give so many talks, so many people coming there with different ideas, talks, and, conferences. Some of them I participated. So I had also the opportunity to talk and give some talks, so it was a great period of time. and also very happy to be in touch and contact with people trying to somehow, sometimes through Skype, sometimes through emails. Keep this. I was very happy also to be in Washington because of the Library of Congress. And before 2 years, maybe 2 years before me, my colleagues was there, and he made some connection with the people working there. So I have very dear friends to me in European.
So now it's my turn just to say thank you for inviting me here. And actually, I just have to say I'm so proud to be a Fulbright alum. Thanks to the USA Embassy for this great opportunity. Of course, you should work to have this scholarship. But I'm a librarian. I'm not a professor, so. My research was at Library of Congress, so I stayed 9 months in Washington, D.C. was a wonderful experience, and actually, okay, I'm a librarian, but I think I'm not scolded to the professor because I visited all the, including George Washington University, all the universities in Washington, D.C., North Carolina was the second my home, because I started my partnership with 5 university libraries from North Carolina. It means Greensboro, Chapel Hill, Wilmington, and Raleigh, NC State, and Greenville. So that was wonderful, and thanks to my supervisor, Grant Harris, who is the head of European Division at Library of Congress, who supported me and gave me this opportunity to travel to North Carolina and to Canada too, because I visited Toronto, Montreal, the library, public library, university in Toronto. So this, without borders, you know, no frontiers, nothing. It was like my second home. I took so many experiences, and of course I changed my mind absolutely, and everybody could see what happened after that at my library. So thanks again, and I encourage everybody who didn't just try to be alum, USA alum, the program, American programs, because that is good experience, and it's forever. This experience is forever. It's here, and the people from there, it's my friends and my family too. Thank you.
All the secret, except the fact that Mrs. Sukinka was famous while conducting her research in Washington. She really made very good friends there, and are still in contact with them. I know that they have been in Moldova. After that, we follow up. Yeah. And what else I would like to mention? I know that thanks to her, except research, except her managerial skills and so on, she managed to learn, to make those from America, Native Americans, to find out about our cuisine, about our cuisine. Yes, I know that Placinte, Mama Liga, and Sarmale, they are so famous there in America. Thanks to
in Washington, D.C. I was. Thank you.
They're always reminding whenever they are coming. And one interesting thing, I know that she's very, very modern, but let me, if you allow me, just 2 seconds more. I know that today morning she got a lot of congratulatory message. Why? Because today is her birthday.
Thank you so much.
And you felt that this is the case of the flowers.
Except that she has right now guests already waiting for her. Anyway, she joined us. Thank you.
Our next speaker, if we could turn to another Fulbright who is lodged at William as we speak, so maybe Tim will share with us her current experience.
Okay, so my name is Kim Everista, and I'm a Fulbright. I'm the only undergraduate student researcher, and I graduated, I studied economics and mathematics, so I'm gonna have to take it from both points of view, because in both fields we love this concept of boundary. So from a mathematician's point of view, it's such a crime. I always think it's the worst thing that many American students, and I guess more Moldovan students and American students, study calculus. I'm proud to say, one of the greatest inventions of the human mind. It's so underappreciated. And from the concept of boundary, it's more important for mathematicians to approach a boundary than to meet a boundary. The whole concept of the limit, the whole concept of the derivative, which makes the table that we're in, the lights that we are, going to the moon, anything. It's all about getting close to something, not necessarily touching it, but just approaching it. And more of the hot topics and more of what's focused on my research is, from an academic's point of view, is approaching a boundary, people versus people, making decisions. The hot topic nowadays is, of course, with trade and with making a decision, but the problem is, why do people have to make decisions? Why do you have to make a choice? Why doesn't everybody trade with everybody? Because the problems occur when people are forced to make a choice rather than be open to something like that. And it's such a broad, it's such an abstract idea that it's always hard to me to put my finger on it. But I think that's where the problem lies, that we don't understand that nowadays it's more important to think before we speak, to understand that we shouldn't close anyone off to anyone else because they may do the same to us. And that, you know, as we understand, I'm sure Moldovans understand probably more than Americans, that trade wars are much, much more dangerous than physical wars. So that's my take on boundary.
Thank you. And by the experience with the boundary is more complex. Even she is a daughter of a Moldovan immigrant to the United States. So she was born in the United States, if I know it right, and she has come. She had the wits to come back to the United States early in the game.
I'd like to see many more cases like that, to come back, all the students and all the children that were born in the United States from Moldovan parents to come back, not all of them, but the majority of them. That would be great.
It would be nice if people
to share with us
children.
their experience and to share with us their mentality. That would be great.
Thank you.
I appreciate that, and thank you for doing that.
And she speaks Russian and Moldovan.
I'm very lucky. It's very lucky it's very lucky for anyone to be blessed to speak in a different language, because it solves more problems than it makes more problems. And yeah, it's a wonderful. That's
and
why.
no boundaries when you speak many languages. For sure. No boundaries.
It knocks sense, because of course I don't speak every language in the world. It's very
Teach
difficult.
Russian and Romanian, not so bad for you to communicate and to chat with a lot.
It can never hurt. It can only help. It can never hurt to just be more open and more receptive. For example, math and economics. I'm very proud to say that I graduated one of the top places in my class in respects to like my professors' esteem and everything like that. But I failed my first exam, and my teacher said I got all of the vocabulary questions wrong. And my teacher said, "He's very mean." He said, "What's wrong with you? The only people who did as bad as you are the international Chinese students who don't speak English at all." I'm like, "Come on, really?" But the fact that I did so bad, like I failed all of my math classes all my entire life, and within 1 year I went from Algebra 101 to the most abstract math class available to undergraduates. So it's like, there's no such thing as you can't. There's no such thing. I mean, they say Beethoven was deaf and all of these problems. There's no such thing. There's no limit. There's no boundary to the accomplishments of the human mind. So.
Well said. Thank you so much. To Katie, who I believe was a Fulbright in Indonesia. So your experience is far wider than what it's
Well, faculty and students and everyone at this table It's so great to be here today on behalf of the U.S. Embassy. It's really exciting for me because there are a lot of U.S. government exchange programs where Americans come to Moldova to teach and do research, and I think we have almost all of them, at least from the American side, at this table. So it's pretty incredible that we were all able to get together. We also have our English language fellow here, so that's another U.S. government-sponsored program. And then we have alumni, and I myself am also a Fulbright alumni from Indonesia, 2007, 2008, and I will never forget that experience either. So today we are talking about boundaries and what they mean for our understanding of ourselves and of our understanding as countries. I'm definitely not an expert on the subject, that's why we have Adam and all of our other colleagues. But I wanted to give some personal reflections on what boundaries have meant for my life. In my life, crossing boundaries has produced more self-introspection, more self-awareness, and more general understanding of the world than I had ever imagined. I've now been to, I've got a list of which countries I've been to. I think I'm at 37, something like that. I'm still going. I want to get to 50 soon. But basically what I found is that I set out to explore the world, and I ended up exploring myself and who I am. When I was a Fulbright in Indonesia, I learned that my identity was very shaped by my surroundings, and that people around the world are basically all good. Like I learned a lot about people being good in Indonesia. When I was a fellow in Tajikistan, I learned that new experiences can lead to some really intense discoveries about yourself. Some of them are very pleasant and surprising, and some of them are not so pleasant. When I was a volunteer in India, I learned that money does not always buy happiness, and that some of the happiest people I've ever met are also some of the poorest. That was very surprising for me. And then when I was working as a development worker in Afghanistan, I learned that the most basic human need is to feel safe, and that people everywhere want peace. So all of these different learnings come from crossing boundaries. And now I've been in Moldova for about 6 months. I don't know what I've learned yet. I still have a year and a half. So you'll have to talk to me again after I leave. But I'm sure that I will have a very good lesson from my time here. So let's continue this discussion about boundaries, and in doing so, let's learn a little more about ourselves.
Thank you. Questions to Kate? Could be practical in nature.
I'll be here for 2 years.
For 2 years, so nobody will actually come to us twice, actually, after 1 year and after the second.
I'll be here, yeah, because every year is a different story.
Well, I just have to comment that it's a pleasure having Kate in this country. She's shuttled life into the life of the embassy, I think, and also its impact on the country. You really made a difference so far, so thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to take an alibi. Don't forget to apply for Fulbright. When you become master's students, when you become PhD students, come find us at the embassy, and we'll let you know if we have any programs at that time. Apply.
It's not only about schools. Embrace is an example right now.
Yeah. We have different level programs. It changes every year. Please come talk to us.
Thank you so much. To Sherry, who is the second generation Fulbrighter in Moldova. Right?
Yes, my son was here also, so thank you. First, thank you very much for the warm welcome. I'm very, very pleased to be here. My area of study is education. So the way that I look at this topic of transforming borders is through the lens of learning. And I really consider that we are all learners. And at the institute that I'm affiliated with, we have been sharing ideas about, particularly about primary education and secondary education. We've looked at curriculum, we've looked at different strategies, and I find that I am learning just as much as they are hopefully learning from me. It challenges my intellect, it motivates me. It also, I think, makes me more imaginative and creative. So when I think about how we move these borders or transform them, this is how I look at it. I also find that I really get impressed with the informal learning that has gone on. I was with some women the other day, and one of them said that they had visited their daughter. And that when they looked in their daughter's refrigerator, it was so empty that even the mouse coming saw it. Then I was at a village. I was in Seratini, Vecchi, a little bit up north, this weekend. And when I was there, you know, it was a very sunny day. It was a very cold day. And the woman that I was strolling with said, "Oh, the sun has a bite today." And so it was like, you know, it was that cold and it had a bite. So I thought that was interesting. And I'm going to go back to the mice story for one bit more. Is Hans Buller, which some of you are familiar with. He's a Swedish diplomat, and he was just honored in D.C. At the Fulbright conference, which I believe was on this very same topic. And what Hans talked about when he was talking to people was he told a story about two mice. And they were put into a bucket of cream. And of course they were going to drown if they didn't swim. So they were swimming for their life, doing everything they could to save themselves. After a while, the one mouse cannot go any longer. And he gives up, and of course he drowns. But the other mouse says, no, I must struggle, I must keep going on. And so he continues to swim. His last breath of energy, he takes an enormous leap, and he ends up on a pat of butter, because the cream is turned to butter with his work. And Hans Brick's, his whole point of this story was that he takes perseverance. And so if we are going to transform borders, and you were asking, like, how do we do that? I think that you brought up a very good point. We have to really have a lot of perseverance, because it's not always easy. There's lots of challenges. When you talked about language, I'm a person that is not fluent by any means in Romanian and Russian. And so I found the language to be a bit of a barrier, and yet I found it really to also be a wonderful learning experience. It seems that everyone is always so very generous in trying to learn. So, looking forward.
Any questions for sharing? And by the way, what was your son's project here?
He was working on his dissertation, and it was on when Moldova broke and Ukraine and Russia, when the Soviet Union broke apart, why did certain countries have revolutions and others did not? So that was his topic.
Thank you. Just an insertion. On Sunday, I went down to the park, and there was an ecological exhibit there. And there was a woman there, a Moldovan woman there, who was running an ecological village here. And she told me that she married a Fulbrighter. And the Fulbrighter stayed in Moldova, and they had 3 children.
Oh, nice. My son fell in love in Moldova. He fell in love with a Moldovan girl. So he loves the country, he loves the woman.
This is a precedent, so it's good. So now let's arrange, outside of Chisinau a little bit and those. And thank you for our colleagues who actually traveled a great distance from Oknitsa, from Belz, and from Kamrat. So let's start with somebody who is furthest out of the Chisinau, and that would be Nicholas in Oknitsa, right? That's 3.5 hours.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we'll go down.
So my name is Nicholas Cicconelli. I'm a Fulbright English teaching assistant here in Moldova. I live in Gedenius, up north. I want to say thank you to Professor Moldovan for the invitation and to the university for hosting us. I recently finished my studies in international relations and Russian studies, so I'm familiar with the idea of boundaries in terms of political boundaries, geographical boundaries, and especially language boundaries. I speak Russian, but not far from perfectly, so here it can be a language barrier. So when I think about boundaries, I think boundaries can be useful, but they become problematic when they're a barrier. So when I came to Moldova, I was expecting to experience some of these boundaries or barriers in terms of language, in terms of economics, And I've had a two-sided experience. So on the one hand, I think that I was pleased to find that there are very few barriers in terms of socializing with people. Moldovan hospitality doesn't know what we call awkward in the United States. So people are very rarely uncomfortable. They're very quick to invite you into their homes. I live with a host family and they help me with whatever I need. They're very, very welcoming and very kind to me. And even the language barrier. People, as an English teacher, people want to come to me to learn English, but they also help me with my Russian. When people hear my accent on the street, they'll go out of their way to help me find what I'm looking for, to get what I need. But the barrier that I wasn't expecting to find and that I've had the most trouble overcoming is a barrier of mentality, especially with my students. And I teach grades 2nd grade through 11th grade, so I have a whole range of ages, but many of my students in 7th grade or 8th grade, they're 13 years old, 14, 15, and I try to encourage them to learn English or to pursue their studies in any capacity, whatever their subject might be. And many of them ask me, well, why? What's the point? It's not worth it. There's no path for me through education. And even their parents sometimes echo these ideas. For instance, my host mother, I'll call her, the woman that I live with, Natasha, she has 2 daughters who are 15 and 10. And we were sitting at tea in our kitchen the other day, and she said, and her husband, Rova, was working late on a Friday night. And he was working as a construction worker on a house that someone who lived in France was building back here. And she said to me, you know, Nicholas, it's really not fair that my husband and I, we both studied at university, we were obliczniiki, we had perfect grades, we worked very hard, and now I have to see my husband, who wanted to become a surgeon, finish his studies and work doing manual labor with his hands to earn money for the family, even though he's a manager during the day, but at night he always has these extra jobs to do. And she said, we teach our children to study hard and to work hard and to be honest, but sometimes I wonder whether that really serves them and whether that helps them, because these other people, they go abroad illegally or they cheat and they bribe and they get ahead in life. So am I really doing my children a service by teaching them to obey the rules and to study hard when they might be better off marrying someone rich or bribing their way through university or through personal connections? And so I didn't have an answer for her. And my students, even at age 15, they have to wonder, after 9th grade, do I continue on and finish studies at the lycée, or do I leave to work in a store and to start earning money at a restaurant? So it's this attitude, this mentality that I find to be the barrier, where the students are bright and they're interested, but they don't know whether their effort will actually gain them any opportunities. And that's the barrier that I've experienced with the most difficulty here. So I think that I don't have any answer for it, but I think the question that I would pose for you to think about is, how do we change this mentality so that people can have faith and trust in not necessarily a system that might need reform, but in their own ability to succeed through hard work? Because when students, even at age 15, don't see a future for themselves through learning or through education, through things that, for me, have opened so many opportunities, I don't know what good we can do them if they lose that hope so early.
Actually, let's kind of remarks. I agree with Nicholas and totally agree with this presentation, the expose. Because I know when I first started my expose at the beginning of our opening ceremony, I have mentioned the word mentality. And actually this is the big problem in the Moldova, and the mentality. And I'm totally agree with you, but what I would like just to add, and maybe one day I will have this opportunity to speak, to talk with those yours that are your kind of neighbors, but not only neighbors, you are living with them in the same house. I would like to talk one day maybe with them. And very short, I will just let you know about my experience. I was born also in the north, in the village of district Rishkan, but not in the town. I was born in the village. So I graduated the primary school in the village, and after that I went to the high school, yes, in Rishkan, actually. Of course, at that moment, for me also it was the same. I had the same questions. So, which will be my future? If I have a future in Moldova or not, but depending also on your determination and your own capacity to build your future. Why? Because once you are motivated and determined to continue your school and your studies, doesn't matter which are the borders of the progress, you have to continue. And I'll let you know, when I was in the fifth, I think when I was 12, 13 years old, I had a dream to become a student at the Sorbonne University. And actually I was born in the village, not here in Chisinau. I didn't graduate at Asaki High School or Prometeo or Mircea Eliade, not very famous high schools in Moldova. I graduated a very simple high school in the north of Moldova, like everybody else. But I continued my studies, first of all in Romania and Timișoara for 5 years. After that I went to Paris. And I went to Paris by myself, without no help, without my mom, without my father, no uncles or aunts. So I went by myself, no sponsor. I went by myself to Paris and I found this Sorbonne by myself. And when I discovered what means Sorbonne, I was very surprised because when I was a child, I was thinking Sorbonne, it's like a city, but Sorbonne is in downtown of the Paris, so it's a university. So I graduated my second master's degree in Paris, in France. I graduated my PhD at the Sorbonne University in law, so constitutional law. And after that, I went to Switzerland for my postdoctorate. So I taught at the university in Switzerland for 1 year and a half, and after that I decided to come back after 15 years of studies abroad. So I am back in Moldova after 15 years old, after 15 years of experience in Europe, in studies and graduations. So depending on your determinations, of your motivation, personal, I know it's not easy, and it's always about the mentality and about the problems, because we are facing with a lot of problems here in Moldova, a lot. I hope that our society and the level of the economical life will improve, and we have another level of another situation, economical situation, social situation here in Moldova. But that's taking probably years and years. So what we need to raise another generation of another mentality.
Thank you.
I'd like to say quickly in regards, I applaud you for all your success, and I'd like to encourage everybody, but especially your community, if it were easy, then it would have no value. People say that a lot, and I thought that's a great post note.
I agree with that. So we have to have goals in your life, and after that, try to be
Excellent.
So moving to 2 hours away from Chisinau, Nicholas II.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Thanks for organizing this. To everyone else, thanks for coming. I wanted to apply to this U.S. Department of State program to sort of make change in a positive direction. I went to Ukraine for about 6 years to teach English. And initially, I signed a 6-month contract. I was supposed to just teach English and go back, where I'm originally from California. And it was during the course of my teaching duties there that I actually met this girl who was interested in what I had to say about my grandfather, who was born and raised in the USSR in Kiev. My grandfather decided to move to the U.S. to become a doctor because life was very difficult in Kiev before Hitler invaded Poland in 1939. My grandfather told me and my brother, both of us, that it would be great for us to go to Kiev, to Ukraine, to see what life is like. Because all we see in movie theaters are these gangsters and these Russian mafia guys shooting up the place. And what's that movie called? Eastern Connections or something? There's a movie that just shows this image of the Eastern world as corrupted and of a sort of suspicious character. And I was really fascinated by that, so I went to Ukraine to teach. Well, again, when I met this girl, she and I sat down and we spoke, and over the course of about 3 years, we got together. And fast forwarding to 2 years ago or so, 3 years ago, we got married. And now I have 2 daughters. So, my experience is a bit different because when we talk about borders, Ukraine means borderland, if I'm not mistaken. And it seems to me, when the USSR was around, there really wasn't a border. It was just everything was USSR. Everyone spoke Russian. The whole system was the same. Everyone had the same toys. All the children played with the same toys, the same clothes, the same cars, and so forth. Everyone had an education, right? No homeless people. But at the same time, I thought, I don't know if that's the way, and I don't want to get into politics, but what's the point I'm making? Well, the point I'm making is, it seems to me, when we talk about borders, what we're talking about is a certain mentality. If you're ever in a plane and you look down, you don't see lines that show Ukraine and then Russia or Poland and so forth. You don't see lines. This is just something that we do as human beings to sort of make it easier to understand that this place is different from this one. It's sort of like, I'm just going to use this analogy. These are 2 water bottles. And it's like, you can have water in this one and then this one, and they're really the same, essentially, right? But then we put them in different containers, right? But it's really the same, essentially. And to me, my wife has family in Russia, but yet she's in Ukraine. But you see, when the USSR collapsed in 1991, it wasn't like a light switch that you just turned off. Ukrainians, Moldovans, Romanians, it wasn't like that. Everything was the same. So these things take time. A mentality shift isn't overnight. It's not a light switch. It takes time. My question is both rhetorical and an actual question. My question is, how do you change your mentality? What does that require? Is it talking like this? What do you think? I mean, it's an actual question. I mean, it has to start somewhere, right?
It's starting from the school.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Education.
even for the kindergarten.
Absolutely. So for me, education is key. So my role as an English language fellow, as I see it, is sort of talking with people, understanding their mentality. It's not just teaching language, it's also understanding others in that process. So in that way, I think it's very critical. And just being here, I really appreciate having so many like-minded people who are engaged in this kind of process. It's motivating, it's inspiring. So thank you for listening.
I'm curious, maybe one of the students could just say something about the mentality, but I hear about the mentality for many years. It's not quite sure exactly what it means, although I know you gotta change it. I don't know what it is, but I know it has to change. So maybe somebody could comment among the students, maybe shouldn't change, should.
Probably they don't have the same mentality that's second or third generation, because they are a young generation,
Just about the mentality.
Yes.
Right? Anybody, any student? It's a mentality of silence. Well, thank you.
No, they don't want to dare, but you have to. You have to say something.
For extra credit.
Well, maybe we should define what mentality means.
That's what I wanted.
So,
Yeah, we do.
when I say mentality, what is that?
Maybe I can comment something. As for me, Moldovan people are children of Soviet people, so maybe we young people, we are a little different from others, but our parents and grandparents and so on, they're very conservative, they're really different, because we are more emancipated than them. Maybe this is the difference.
So the boundary is there as an age gap, basically, as a generation gap.
Yes.
And it's a different type
They
of
are
mentality.
more Sovietic, they are more, I can explain this, but these people feel more that they're inferior, and there is something there in high position that must say them what to do.
Which makes sense. I mean, those were their experiences, and so then that's where their mentality comes from, just like your experiences are creating your mentality. And the fact that we're all meeting together and having this kind of discourse, this type of discussion, means that we're going to be creating a different mentality, perhaps.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
From
Now-
the students present here, sorry for interrupting, have you ever been in America? I don't know, was one of these work and travel program? No? No one? Because I know there are a lot of students and they tell us change the law.
It's up to apply for a Fulbright program.
Yeah.
So.
You can do work and travel.
Yeah.
Thanks. Moving to an hour and 50 minutes.
What about the
Huh? That's what I'm doing. An hour and 50 minutes.
Is that me?
So the room becomes next, and then it's going to come right, and then.
Hello. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. There's absolutely no shortage of the graciousness and sincerity in Moldovan people. I've only been here 2 months, but already it feels a bit like home. Well, I actually came to be in this country on account of a boundary. In order to graduate from my university, I was forced to choose a second foreign language, and I previously studied Spanish, and so my options were Mandarin Chinese, Arabic, or Russian. So, yes, all difficult.
less commonly spoken taught languages.
Yes. And because I have a musical education background, my background, I studied music education and English with a literature emphasis. So, very artsy. This is my idea of a boundary is going to be more anecdotal in nature, and unfortunately, maybe less lofty than perhaps maybe Alan or even Sherry. So I studied Russian for 2 years at university, and then I got the opportunity to travel abroad. I got a scholarship to go to Edo for 6 weeks. And then following that experience, I began to have almost an obsession, a very strong appreciativeness of Eastern European culture and language and connection. And what I especially love about the people of Eastern Europe is the idea that in social situations, there often aren't boundaries. In America, when I'm conversing with someone, I often find that either myself or the other party that I'm communicating with puts up a sort of boundary. And perhaps they might be afraid to speak the truth because of political correctness or being polite or manners. And here, it's a little bit different. The truth, I feel, is felt a little bit more strongly. For instance, I was in class the other day. I also teach. So I'm teaching 2nd grade through 11th grade, just like Nick. I'm also at a lyceum in Moldova. And so I'm sitting in class, and the teacher, my co-teacher, leans over to me and she says, I just want you to know, it's getting cold. And some of us have noticed that well, I know you're from Florida and it's always summer, but if ever you need help, because it seems like you're not dressed yet for winter. So you see that there are these boundaries. And I myself, I came here to this country with self-imposed and also other boundaries that were put upon me, with the idea that the children that I would be teaching would somehow be different. I mean, it's half a world away. Will they have the same values, the same ideas? What are their concepts of school? Do they want the same things? And then I knew from the very first day when I was alone with my class and the children began to test me. They began to put their toes in the waters and say, oh, new teacher, let me see how far I can get away with some behavioral issues and discipline. And so I knew from that first moment, I said, oh, all children are the same. So it's kind of going to echo some of the ideas of my colleagues, is that people really do want the same things, and true communication and understanding does happen when we allow these abstract ideas, these human ideas of barrier to fall away. I feel that at that point we can maybe transcend, or have a chance of transcending to another better plane.
So nicely said a lot about the rights and poetry in Romania. Thank you so much. And an hour and a half from Kishinev from Kamrat.
So that's where to stand.
Alisa.
Okay. My name is Carissa Jackson, and I'm in Kamrat at the university. And I'm the last one, and everyone's already said tons of really wonderful things, so I'll try to come up with something novel. I would like to talk about personal boundaries. My whole life, I've moved around a lot, so when anyone ever says, like, Akudabui, like, it's very easy for me, like, America, but as soon as you ask which state, then I'm like, I guess Kentucky, we'll settle on that. But I've always moved around a lot, and in doing so, I feel very comfortable adapting to new situations. But I also have some sort of fear I'm realizing now, like in retrospect, this fear that one day I'm going to wake up and I'll be 50 years old and I will have never done anything. I will have gotten really comfortable in one situation and just be stuck there. And I will have missed a lot of opportunities that are presented to me, whether through school or university or whatever. So I'm very impulsive, and I will apply and I will jump on that plane and go to Russia and study there and go to Ukraine. But I do this very intentionally also because I feel that when we put ourselves in, when we're outside of our comfort zone, that's when we grow the most. That's when we become, personally, I feel like I become a better person when I put myself in situations that aren't the most comfortable. Because when you go to another country, I'm sorry. Okay. As some of my colleagues, shameless. As some of my colleagues said before, in a different way, you leave pieces of you, and everywhere you go, and you pick up pieces of you. You have to start answering for yourself in a different way when you're in a different country, and especially in different languages. The language boundary, which I'm noticing very much as a student of Russian, and now I'm teaching English at university, you feel very insecure when you're speaking. You feel like, I hate this because I feel stupid, but it's not a measure of your intelligence. You are learning another language. You have to understand, you have to make answers for yourself and identify qualities about yourself that you wouldn't have considered if you were just in your native country, where everything is comfortable. Comfortable is a relative term, of course. I don't know. I think it's very healthy. I think it's very polesna to go abroad and put yourself in new situations so you can learn more about yourself and become a more, I feel like a more productive member of society, the more I grow, very intentionally, like I said, by lowering boundaries, or not lowering them, but seeing them and forcing myself, I guess, across them. Forcing myself, that's so aggressive. Okay, that's it.
Any questions? Carissa?
I went to college in Kentucky, and I graduated from high school. Louisville? What? That's great. Oh my goodness. I love that. My parents have a house near Louisville.
My husband actually started working in Louisville, like where one of the biggest companies.
This is such a small world.
Yeah.
No boundaries. Yeah, no boundaries. Although we like us.
Okay, so I also want to ask somebody who applied for Fulbright and will be applying again to speak, and it's a friend and a colleague, Justin, who will share with us a few thoughts about.
Okay, thanks. Just let me set up the camera since I know where I'm going to stand. All right. I'll come out in this open spot right over here. Thanks, Adine. Appreciate that you organizing this event along with. I'm actually representing two different entities here tonight. I'm also a colleague of Valentina and Violetta in the International Collaboration Department here at ULIM, and as well I work with Dr. Moldovan in this project Casa Mare that we've mentioned tonight, which has kind of subsumed his Fulbright research, which is based on professionalizing social work here in Moldova. I'm a licensed clinical social worker from the state of New York. I've been in Moldova for 2.5 years now. Came over with my wife, who got a job here after did the Peace Corps here in the early 2000s. So I've been familiar with Moldova for a long time, and came here in 2005. Was able to see kind of the progression of how rapidly changing the country is here in terms of a lot of things, in terms of culture, in terms of boundaries. And boundaries for me, in terms of social work, is more of a psychological term. And that's more what we're studying here, and I'll be brief in my remarks. But in terms of looking at social work as a profession, we're traveling around the country, going to, we're just in Kamrat today, doing a focus group with a number of social workers there, in Orhe, in Soroka, in Dubashar, in these areas where they are definitely ethnic boundaries, actual physical boundaries with other countries, and the boundaries that the social workers deal with every day are very real, because they are living and working in communities where they grew up a lot of times, and so they are having to deal with these personal and professional boundaries with people who they've known for a long time, people who are friends of theirs, people who are family members of theirs, who are coming to them and asking them for help. And so there's a lot of emotion around how social workers actually are in their community, and it's not just, that's not even mentioning ethnic boundaries, as far as even the languages that are spoken: Russian, Romanian, Gagauz. We're in the south doing research with social workers down there. They get these materials from the Ministry of Social Protection here in Chisinau, and they can't read them. They're in Romanian. They get trainings in Romanian, and they can't process them. They can't learn from them, and vice versa. So a lot of the things that they're learning down there, in terms of Gagauzia, in terms of the south of Moldova, and how all these boundary issues are coming to the forefront. They can't really teach. They're not teaching those boundaries even to other people within Moldova. There's these different directorates of the Ministry of Social Protection around the country that kind of operate independently, and they don't really talk to each other. So there are more boundaries in the sense of just, Moldova, other parts of the world. There's a lot of boundaries within Moldova that are beyond psychological, more, just different organizations, different communities, different professions not really working together. So it's been a really interesting opportunity to go around as part of this Fulbright research, which we've kind of subsumed under a project Casa, Mare, and to kind of research this issue. And to bring it back here to Ulim, as Vadim mentioned, we have been working here to develop a new Master of Social Work program here in Ulim based on international standards. And Vadim and I were both affiliated with the same university system, the University of New York. I graduated from one college within that university system, and Vadim is a professor in another. So we have the same kind of perspective on what needs to be done. But we're also pulling in a lot of other professors from around the United States and from Europe, and are now going around and talking to academics around in Moldova and seeing how they have their own sorts of indigenous methods for how to operate. And a lot of it is rooted in boundaries, and that is where internationally we can learn so much from Moldovans, because Moldovans are experts in this. They do not really have, this is something they deal with all the time. I mean, people with different languages, different ethnicities, people who have different ideological differences live next to each other, they're family members, they work with each other. So the idea of boundaries are very real for people, in life and work, family. And so there's a lot of things that, when we talk about any profession, that any expertise from other part of the world, and any international project that comes in and talks about, we're going to work in Moldova, we're going to provide expertise that we have. Well, really, more of the expertise is here on the ground and trying to synthesize that knowledge and really bring it out into the greater body of knowledge and all these sorts of issues. And so that's been very interesting, and that's, I think that's all I want to say about that, but I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this colloquium. This has been very interesting, and I really appreciate the range of perspectives and the range of models for boundaries. This is a really interesting subject that we talk about in the Master of Social Work program a lot, so this has been very nice. So thank you.
Can I talk a little bit about this?
Can I ask you something? I have mentioned something about some documents from the Social Protection Ministry. Are you sure that those documents are not on the website in Russian languages?
They might be. This is something firsthand that we were told from some of the people on the ground there. And they were, I think, more talking about how they didn't feel connected to the rest of the system, because a lot of the trainings that the Ministry of Social Protection delivered were in Romanian. So they would bring those workers from down there to Chisinau and then deliver these trainings in Romanian. I think they just, some of them that understand Romanian or maybe even speak it fluently, but it wasn't something that was very native to them. So I'm sure it's available, but again, it's like one of those things where they don't feel really connected to kind of the rest of the system. And there's probably, of course, when you look at Moldova, it's actually a pretty big country. I mean, even though it is a small country, there's a lot of the regions are kind of doing things independently. So it was more kind of it was a general feeling, but
I know all the documents and all the official papers. I mean about the official legislation should be translated and made in Russian.
Right.
So no problem. Only you have to ask, and those people that really needs these documents, they could just call the ministry and ask, because they have to provide them in both languages at least.
Right. Well, it still is a little bit of a problem in terms of training, because there are these independent training efforts that are happening all around the country, and they're not connected. And a lot of the trainings that are being delivered in Romanian.
And so it's more of a matter of trying to figure out how to connect the system. And we're hoping that through this research and through this Fulbright program that we can actually start to kind of connect the dots a little bit within this profession. And I think it's, it's valid. I mean, these are emotions that people are expressing to us. So I'm sure the documents are there, but again, it's one of those things where it's trying to create some kind of connection within and kind of break through the boundaries, as we've been talking about, and just bring people together to feel a little more connected.
And we'll know now to consult you.
So, information, but just the access to the information should not be a problem.
Yeah.
Sure. No, it's less about access.
So let me add a few words on this subject of the boundary, which is dear to my heart as a professional, on a personal level. On the professional level, I came to a realization that the boundary is probably one of the most important things in the social work skill, and it's really dancing the boundary, transcending the boundary, being able to manage the boundary between the client and the worker, between the system of the profession and the system of the community of the work is probably the highest skill of social work. This is something we talk about in class a lot, and Justin's right about that. Just a few words off the top of my head. The Greeks had a god for the boundary, and that was Hermes. What else? Oh, another thought that we had recently in the conversation with Justin, I thought that Moldova may not be a country. It could be a boundary. Because there are so many different boundary issues within this country that I can't think of any other country. Herodotus, and I think it was Adam who referenced him, said that this region was the boundary between the south and the north, and beyond this region was this dark land of the Cimmerians. It was the end of the world. This was always the boundary between east and west, and every single invader, whoever came from the east, traversed this country.
First of all, I would like to add something more. We are totally agree with this idea, but also this region, Moldova, this area, this space is also the boundary between Latin and Slavic religion. Roots. I read your ideas. So actually, it's like
Anticipated.
So it's the single country in the world that has a very nice combination of the roots, Slavic and Latin. Slavonic, yeah. Slav.
To continue my thought.
So it's the single country in the world.
The invaders came to this country not only from the east, but they came from the west as well. This is the country, of course, that was the crux of the conflict right before the World War II, and it is Romanian oil that was one of the reasons why it was urgent on the part of Hitler to invade. This is the boundary, this is the outward boundary of the Roman Empire. This is where the Traian Wall was, and Romans could travel no longer because it was the Moldovans, well, the Proto-Moldovans, who stopped the Romans around the 2nd century AD. This is also, so this is geographically, there's probably no other country that is so strategically situated. And also within the country, you have all kinds of the boundary issues. You mentioned, of course, the boundary between the Slavic ethnos and the Roman, and also the languages of all kinds seem to coalesce in this region. We today went to Kamrat, and there's a whole other angle here of this being the boundary between the Turkish influence. And then just one other issue. And you know what? You are so lucky to be born here, to live here. You may travel. You may go to the United States on a Fulbright. You may go to Spain to do Erasmus or something. But you must come back because there's really no other country that is so exciting. What's interesting about the people who live here, there is an interesting kind of willful blindness to to the greatness of this land. You talk about the mentality. The mentality is not to be overcome. It's like the boundary. This is not something to be changed, but transcended. This is something that has to bubble up from the depth of unawareness. I really don't know any other like ethnos that is so talented. We went again to today to Camrat, and we talked to the social workers, and they're of course not as sophisticated as you guys are from the capital, right? But every single one of them speaks at least 4 languages, and this is the boonies. This is the countryside. I challenge somebody to go to Kentucky and to find somebody who speaks 1 language. I'm sorry.
From the second grade, they study Russian, the Moldovan, Gagauzien, or Bulgarian, English. From the second grade. It's
Actually, one of the best mathematicians in the world is Moldova. He's genius. Brilliant guy.
By the way, I went internationally.
Yes. He's at Stanford right now. He's at Stanford right now. I think he got offers from Harvard. He was like a teenager. He's brilliant. He's a brilliant guy.
So I think ultimately the future and the potential of this land is not necessarily to change the mentality as such. It's really to utilize it, to utilize the history, the potential, the culture, and to live it. It's not really to go one way or another. It's not really to establish this is going to be the boundary where Russia is not going to go and capture this land. It's not the land where the West is going to be stuck. This is really an opportunity for these incredible people to live the richness of the culture that is born of so many different influences. Because the Moldovans have the talent of synthesizing the Turkish influence, the Russian influence, the Romanian influence, the Polish influence, the Hungarian influence, all the boundaries, all around this country, the invaders, they would come and they would go, but the Moldovans would keep the best out of that, somehow. And they would be able to adapt, always adapt, and out of the adaptation also creating this richness of this land. So, I speak in huge appreciation. I think I'm almost as lucky as you are, but I am lucky that I found an opportunity to come back from the United States. I was in exile for so many years. But really, my identity is really warped. I really don't know who the hell I am. Because my ethnicity is Jewish. I was born in Ukraine. I grew up in Moldova. I went I spent 32 years in the United States, and I'm back in Moldova, and I speak Russian. I don't know. But to me, I think it's really important, as this may be somehow linked to the identity of a Moldovan, is that it's so hard to pinpoint this. We met we were doing the survey, and I was asking the social workers in a comrade about their ethnicity. And they would say, well, is it the way it's written or the way we think about it? Or another one says, well, I'm written as a Moldovan, but I'm Russian. It's just, and then another one, I'm a Gagauzian and a Bulgarian. The mixtures. And maybe the identity is indeed in this amalgamation, this ability to synthesize, which is of course how the boundaries are traveled through transcendence. So thank you so much. We probably should move on with the exciting film if you want to watch it. You do want to watch it? Do you?
But before Valentina has to say something.
Oh, yeah, of course.
We have another reception at 6 p.m., so I would like also to leave, and I'd like to say goodbye.
I thought you want to invite us.
Before Valentina. I'm very sorry to not watch this movie, but I promise next time I would like to
We'll send you a link.
Yeah, why not? So I have been more than scheduled.
And all of you are going to be on YouTube, by the way. So you're all going to be hugely famous.
Send us the link. Send us the link.
Of course.
So before letting you to enjoy in continuation the movie, I would like to extend once again our gratitude and appreciation for having you today here. And in spite of the fact that I'm not an expert in the field, of some geography of boundaries and so on. The only, I can say, the final conclusion I can draw by myself as a result of everything that was being tackled here during our discussion is that it's not about possible, the origin of our nation, the influence of nation on others, or where are they coming from, the university that we have graduated from. At least there is not about the difference between boundary and frontier, but the only thing it seems to me it's standing together for a better world. This is my final conclusion, and I can say that such kind of events like today's colloquium not only call for appreciation of other cultures or their contributions, but for the reflection of our culturally rooted behaviors, and identifying paths to make the world better, and be more conscious about other cultures, if you agree. Thank you. So I would like to extend I can say modest appreciation, so certificate of appreciation that I am pleased to hand over to representatives of U.S. Embassy here in Moldova that represents Public Affairs Office for the substantial contribution to the organization of this colloquium. Thanks a lot. Thank you as well, Mrs. Kagina. Thank you. Two more persons, very important at our university since their arrival in Moldova and especially at Olim. Surely this is Mr. Vadim Moldovan. Thanks a lot. And surely to my respected colleague that as he told you, it's, from this academic year he started to work for our Center of International Cooperation as a project assistant. And I would like to thank, with a symbolic, again, certificate for the contribution of I have some other certificates of participation for our Fulbright scholars that are present here. I would like from there at the beginning to apologize in the case if I don't have for all of you. I just got the list of participants yesterday from Mr. Moldovan. In case if in the case I will take your name and I will send it. Because I know most of you are not just coming at Olim for this event. I noticed that you are present at some other event that we have organized at Olim as well. We had in September the inauguration of the NATO Center, and I recognize you are present. I hope that we are going to meet in some other events as well. Just in case. So it's the first one I have to award the certificate of participation awarded to Nicholas. It's for you. Thanks a lot. We have two Nicholas. This is your. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Nicholas number 2. Thanks a lot for your participation and showing your experience. Mrs. Cheryl. Thank you.